Alrighty, hello guys. We are talking about urbanization today. We're gonna see if I can figure out how to present this slideshow. That would be useful, but I don't know if it will allow me to. Oh no, why are we? Hello. File. Can I not just present from beginning? Presenter view, maybe? Slideshow. Play from start. Nailed it. Alright, so like I said, we're talking about urbanization today. When we had our live session last week, I believe that was Friday morning, something that was mentioned was that the A+ College Ready videos are not always super useful, and they might not always provide additional information outside of just reading off of the screen. So that is definitely my bad. I want to make sure that I'm giving you guys stuff that's useful and providing all the information you need. So I'm going to try my darndest to be a little bit more cognizant of that and to make sure I am doing pre-recorded and live lectures instead of just relying on the college ready ones. Now, with that being said, if you prefer the A+ College Ready lectures, their YouTube channel, I would highly recommend following it. They have a whole playlist on their YouTube channel just to AP Environmental Science resources dedicated to that. So if you enjoy those, definitely feel free to check those out. And they'll be a useful tool when we're reviewing for the AP exam as well. But for now, we're chatting about urbanization. So it's sort of what it sounds like. Urbanization is just the creation and the growth of both urban and suburban areas. It's measured as the percentage of people in a country or in the world living in those urban or suburban areas. So, for example, right now, approximately 52% of the world's people live in urban areas. So, what they're saying is like, in Alabama, for example, it would be like most people living in either Birmingham, Montgomery, Huntsville, Mobile, like the bigger Alabama cities, and fewer people living out in more rural, spread out areas. Even areas like Madison, obviously, Madison, Hartselle, the areas that are surrounding Huntsville still count because it says urban and suburban. So while downtown Huntsville would be the urban part, Madison would be a suburb of Huntsville. You can see in some areas, urbanization is really, really intense. In this particular city in Bangladesh, I can see a few trees, but for the most part, whatever that area looked like before there were humans around is probably just about forgotten at this point. And so you can see the most populous cities per time zone as of December 2018. So this might be a little bit outdated. But for our time zone, well, I guess it doesn't have any for our time zone on there. It's just got New York as the closest one to us. But as far as Central Time, there isn't one. But you've got New York, you've got Mexico City, Los Angeles, California, Phoenix, Arizona. So you can see where most people around the world congregate. If you want to pause this for a second and just kind of look around and see like these most populated areas around the world, you are more than welcome to. And so if you break it into just the US, it's really interesting to look at and to see. It's kind of, I guess it's kind of funny. They don't even have Alaska on here because there's not a whole lot of people there. But you can see in Hawaii, if we start out here, one out of the islands has way more people than the rest. And then you can kind of see it makes sense when you look at the rest of the country. You can see Dallas is huge. You can see Los Angeles, San Diego, Portland, areas like that do have much higher populations. Atlanta is huge. Birmingham's not too small. Birmingham's pretty big. And then Huntsville, we're a little bit bigger there. It looks like this map, if I'm looking at it correctly, it might be a little blurry down here, is from 2010. So if I had to guess, if this map is 10 years old, I would guess now that Huntsville would be even bigger now than it was then, because Huntsville is really booming over these past 10 years. And then obviously you can see the East Coast is very, very heavily populated. So another term that we use when we're talking about cities expanding and things like that is urban sprawl. And so this is when cities expand into rural areas around the city center. So this is when suburbs and neighborhoods get formed. So, for example, it's kind of like Tuscaloosa. I think Tuscaloosa would be a great example of this. I've heard a lot of people, especially when I was in school down there, a lot of people would say, like, yeah, Tuscaloosa is cool, but the city wouldn't exist if it weren't for the college. So it's kind of like the college formed and there were the dorms and things like that. But then urban sprawl happened and a lot more businesses, a lot more neighborhoods, a lot more suburbs started forming around Tuscaloosa because of the university popping up there. So urban sprawl. So you can kind of see this is a really interesting juxtaposition here. The neighborhood on the left right here definitely looks like what I've seen. Oh, it's a pretty house. Definitely looks like what I've seen in parts of Madison, right? I'm sure some of y'all have seen neighborhoods that look like this. And it's spread out so far. We assume the city that this is all based around is probably far, far left. But here's this, and it's backed right up against farmland because it's really starting to encroach on this urban area. Encroach on this rural area because suburbs have gotten bigger. So if you look at trends in urbanization by region, again, this one is around 2003, 2004. So it would be interesting to look back at this data now and see how much it's changed or how accurate the 2030 projection is looking like it's going to be. But you can see they've got 1950 is the lightest blue, 2000 is the medium, and then that dark, dark color is what they project it'll be like in 2030. So you can see overall throughout the world, urbanization has gone up, obviously. In Africa, they've had a huge jump, as well as Asia. Latin America jumped quite a bit from 1950 to 2000. And then more developed regions, they kind of expect that urbanization to die off just a little bit. You can see they don't expect it to grow as much between 2000 and 2030 as it did between 1950 and 2000. So some of the consequences of urban sprawl, I'm sure y'all have gotten used to this lineup by now. We talk about things, what they are, and then we talk about how they're negatively affecting the environment, right? So some of the consequences, you've got loss of cropland. It's not great. So that's obviously land that we use for harvesting fruits and vegetables and other crops. The loss and fragmentation of forests, grasslands, wetlands, and wildlife habitats. So we're losing biodiversity because we're cutting into different biomes by turning them into subdivisions. The increased use and pollution of water, increased runoff and flooding. Flooding is really common because when you look at, like, if we're talking about flooding specifically, if we look at this right here, if you've got a huge rainstorm that happens on this little section, this little snapshot of land, obviously this side is going to be able to handle it much better than this side because when it rains on all this concrete and you probably have gutters and sewage systems, but still this area is going to be able to absorb water into the earth a lot more easily than this area that's covered in concrete, right? So increased runoff and flooding, increased energy use and waste, increased carbon dioxide emissions. Even if we break it down even further and we just go into, say, the ways that decreased vegetation can affect the environment, it can lead to less air pollution absorption by some plants. So it's kind of the same as when we talked about slash and burn farming and tearing down the rainforests, because when you tear down the trees and the natural foliage that would be in this area, you're taking away organisms that were previously absorbing CO2 and now they're not. So not only, that was number one, but number two, not only are we tearing down organisms that were previously absorbing CO2, but they're also no longer producing oxygen. We like it when they do that. We would like for them to continue doing that. You're taking away shade, leading to increased temperatures. And I know that probably sounds like a little bit of a stretch to some of you. I don't know something I noticed, one of the first things I noticed when I got a motorcycle in college was that when you are riding a motorcycle, and I was in Tuscaloosa, so we would start out and be riding around in the city. And then as soon as we got out of Tuscaloosa and we got into more rural areas, the temperature dropped so much. And I was just, at the time, I was so shocked. But it really makes sense when you think about it because there's not as much shade in more urban areas. But not only that, all of that concrete is able to really absorb heat and it holds it. So the more developed and urbanized an area is, the more it's going to hold on to temperatures, or sorry, hold on to heat and raise temperatures. And then finally, and probably pretty obviously, there's less area for wildlife habitats as that vegetation decreases due to urbanization. That greater need for water is going to lead to depletion of groundwater, which we're going to talk about even further later this week, and saltwater intrusion due to aquifer depletion. So that's basically like when, especially, it's more common in coastal areas, but when you've depleted aquifers so much that water from the oceans is able to move up into what is supposed to be freshwater aquifers. So not great. We don't love that. That's definitely not great for crops and for drinking water. This is the High Plains aquifer that's just about in the center of the country. And you can see areas where it's at stable levels are pretty small. I mean, this whole thing used to be that light blue color. Oh my gosh, I almost said cyan. I've been playing too much Among Us. The whole thing used to be that light blue color back in the day, but at this point now you can see there are far more areas that are either at 10% decline, 25, 50, 75, or it's gotten so bad in some areas that it's just in that gray where you can see it's a very, very thin aquifer. More than 75% decline from what it was originally. So you can see, like I said, this one is more common. The saltwater intrusion, it's definitely more common in areas closer to the ocean, but this one's labeled pretty well. You can see where the water table is. You can see the freshwater aquifer over on the left, and then you've got limestone. And eventually, over time, if enough of the freshwater is taken out through wells or pumping or irrigation or whatever systems they're using, then the salt water from the ocean will start to come in and permeate our freshwater aquifers. So further impacts on the environment, more urban runoff because of more impervious surfaces. So that's just a fancy way of saying we're putting in surfaces that can't be penetrated, basically. So concrete instead of dirt, right? Increased carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere due to the burning of fossil fuels. We know about that. That's the impact of almost all the things that humans do, if we're being honest. So you can kind of see the breakdown of how this works. In the top left corner, you can just see natural ground cover, right? Like things are pretty normal. There are no impervious surfaces. Evapotranspiration is normal. Runoff is low. Things are pretty normal in that area. When you've got like houses and that's a pretty rural area, like the top right one, you've got 10 to 20% impervious surfaces. So maybe they just have like a concrete or a cement driveway, something like that. Deep infiltration is still about the same. Runoff is a little bit higher, but overall your evapotranspiration is pretty steady. But as you start to get into the bottom left and bottom right photos or images, you can see that almost everything is impervious surfaces. So this bottom left one would be like suburbs, and the bottom right one would be like a more urban area. So there are definitely some ways that we can decrease the impacts that this urbanization has on the environment, and some of those are going to be things like mass transit systems, so public transportation. That is something that Europe really has a beat on. Europe and some of the larger cities in the U.S. have really great public transport systems. In Alabama, we definitely don't yet, but hopefully one day, because that would reduce the number of individual cars. Also, increasing water infiltration by doing things like replacing traditional pavement with permeable pavement, Permeable pavement is really, really cool. If you haven't ever looked it up, I definitely recommend going to YouTube and just searching permeable pavement. And honestly, that should get you what you need to see. It's really cool, and it would be really, really useful if more cities would implement that. Planting trees, it seems obvious and simple, but it works. Compact building design, which includes multi-story buildings and parking garage. So creating buildings that aren't quite so spread out. So this is an example of porous pavers or permeable asphalt. But the way that this system works, you've got the pavers on top, sand or gravel, coarse gravel, and then geotextile fabric in between the layers so that it can infiltrate into the subsoil. And what's great is that the water that comes in, even though there might be like oil or, if this is a road that people drive on, there might be some pollution on it. As it goes through these different layers of sand and gravel and thicker gravel, it eventually will filter out most of those things so that the water can join back in with the natural groundwater and be fine. Very cool. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go right here to YouTube and I'm going to find permeable pavers is what we'll search. So you can kind of see. Here we go. I don't want this. So this is in Peterborough. I'm assuming that is Europe. So they look like normal asphalt, but the roof water drains straight into the permeable drives, which connect to the permeable road. I wonder if they will show. I just want to see the water going into it. Oh, there we go. So you can see the ton of water that was just poured out, and you can just watch as it just kind of goes into the road. Really, really neat. That is something that if that much water were poured on a road here in the US, it would not be good. There are no puddles. It just goes straight through. I think that is very, very cool. This one, I don't want to watch later. I want to watch it now. We'll watch one more. I just think these are so neat.
Allows water to penetrate through to the subbase, which acts as an underground stormwater management facility. Here is a conventional paving section in this parking lot prior to installing the porous pavement. Standard hot mix asphalt does not allow water to penetrate through it, forcing the water to sheet flow across the pavement until it reaches the inlet. After consulting an engineer to design the porous paving section, the excavation is ready to begin. And recharge bed.
So you can see they're doing a layer of thick gravel.
Is placed over the recharge bed to stabilize the surface for the paving equipment. After fine grading the trigger course, the recharge bed is ready for the placement of the porous pavement. The production of asphalt begins with a loader filling the cold feed bins. Is done placing the porous asphalt, the mix may need to cool.
So in this case, it's actual asphalt, not pavers like that other one.
Before beginning compaction. With 2 to 4 passes using a static roller.
Side note that I've always wanted to drive one of those roller things.
A final pass of a light roller may be required to remove roller marks from the surface after the mix has cooled substantially. In conclusion, porous asphalt pavements allow stormwater storage to operate in an environmentally friendly way. as they uphold infiltration.
So neat. I just think that's very cool. If you want to look further into it, I would definitely recommend it. I think that stuff is awesome. But that is all that I have for you guys today. So I hope that that was useful, and we will stop there. Now I just have to figure out how to stop this recording. All right. You guys have a great day.